Okay, here's the deal. So you probably heard me mention this in other videos or the ongoing series I've been doing, but I absolutely love Code Vein. The art style and the gameplay are practically tailor-made to things I enjoy, and at the time it came out, it felt like a real breath of fresh air into the Souls-like genre. And now, after years and years of waiting, we're finally getting a sequel, and let me tell you, dude, I am beyond hyped. Because on top of the trailers looking absolutely sick, believe it or not, your boy has also already played it. That's right, back in December, I flew out to LA for an exclusive preview event where I got to play Code Vein 2 early. Huge shout out to Bandai Namco for having me out there, by the way. The event was absolutely amazing. I got to meet a ton of really cool people. All around, it was a fantastic time. But enough yapping about the event. You guys are here because you want to see the game, so let's jump in to Code Vein 2. Alright, so here we are with Code Vein 2, boys. Now, this is going to be a little bit different than my usual videos because I'm sort of commentating over the gameplay I captured here. I think some people at the event were doing live commentary, but I figured it'd be best not to. I don't know if I showed it in the intro, but the setups were like kind of close together, and I'm sure some poor IGN reporter didn't want me screaming, "Off my screen!" or something like that while trying to do their actual review of the game. Anyway, fair warning, this video's probably going to be all over the place. I'm going to edit it down, obviously, since I've got about 3 hours of footage here, but I'm gonna sort of talk about stuff as it happens, so if this video completely lacks any kind of structure, my bad on that. Also, just as a quick disclaimer here, most of the things I have to say in this video are gonna be pretty positive, because this demo was really fun, but I do want to sort of temper that a bit. The thing is, even with all the changes and improvements and the new things they added to this game, it's still very much so a Code Vein game as far as the levels and the bosses and even the combat and feel are concerned. You can definitely tell they had players who liked the first game in mind when they were working on a lot of this stuff. So just keep that in mind as we go. Like I said in the intro, I'm someone who really liked the first game, so naturally I ended up really liking a lot of stuff in this demo. But depending on how you feel about Code Vein 1 or certain parts of it, you may or may not feel the same way I do about some of this stuff. So kicking things off here, we're immediately introduced to the best designed character I've ever seen. Seriously, whoever was in charge of character design here, god tier. Absolute legend. She basically starts off just dropping some lore on us, which, to be honest, I kind of tried to ignore. We ended up playing things a bit out of order and like jumped around a lot since this was a demo, so I figured story stuff would be best saved for the full game, and I kind of tried to avoid spoiling myself as much as possible. To give you a brief rundown of the scenario though, basically you're being tasked with going back in time to stop this calamity thing that's gonna end the world. And that's really where the bulk of the game takes place. Once you get the lore dump out of the way, your companion here uses her powers to send you back in time, and you end up in the tutorial level. Oh, actually, another thing I do want to mention before we get into it here, this game has a very in-depth character creator. If you played Code Vein 1, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's kind of one of the best parts of the game, but unfortunately, I was having some issues with my capture card, and by the time I got that sorted out, I'd already lost like 20 minutes of the capture session, so for the sake of time, I ended up just going with a default character. Trust me though, the character creator is even better than the last game. If you're anything like me, be prepared to spend at least an hour in there. Anyway, to get back to the gameplay here a bit, almost immediately after spawning in the tutorial level, you're greeted with your first companion and then thrown into combat. The combat is basically what you'd expect from a Souls-like game. You got your dodge, your strong and your weak attacks. You guys probably know the drill at this point. And returning from Code Vein 1, you have a set of abilities you can use that consume your resources. In Code Vein 1, they were called gifts, but in this game, they're called Forme, I think. And then you regen that resource by attacking or getting crits on enemies, so it kind of creates a combat loop. One interesting thing though, is they did kind of redo the companion system from the last game. In Code Vein 1, your companion is basically just an NPC summon that follows you around, helps you with boss aggro and stuff like that. But in this game, there's actual skills and benefits to your companion being around. So as you can see down there, we've got this like blue gauge next to the actual health bar, and that's essentially an energy that comes from your partner. And you want to keep that up because the partner you have at any given time will give you like buffs or abilities, and those are actually affected if that bar is low or missing. So you can't just treat it like an overshield or whatever. Here you can see I start messing around with the blood codes a bit, which are also returning from the first game. I'm going to talk a bit more about this later, but they did make a lot of changes to the system that are actually really cool. The blood codes themselves, or at least the ones we had access to in the demo, seem a lot more unique from one another than the last game, and at the very least from what I messed around with, it doesn't feel like there's any codes that just exist to like farm abilities off of or whatever. whatever, which was an issue in Code Vein 1. Although part of that might be because your abilities are now tied to your weapon rather than your blood code, but again, I'm gonna talk a bit more about that later. Anyway, moving right along here, you can see I'm just sort of getting used to the combat and I'm messing around with the abilities a bit. And this is actually another area where I think they made really big strides from the first game. In Code Vein 1, a lot of the abilities felt kind of clunky and really not great to use. And while there is still some of that in this game, to be fair, I will say that on the whole, a lot more of the abilities feel strong, and you're actually rewarded for spending your resources, rather than just sitting on them and pretending your skills don't exist. Moving on here, I finally get to my first missile, which is the bonfire system in these games. It looks different than the last game, but the function is more or less the same. Also, one interesting note is, as you can see here, I'm getting transported to this, like, alternate space that's for me and my time-traveling companion. It almost reminded me of, like, the Velvet Room from the Persona games. But to be honest, I'm not really sure what this is for, aside from, you know, talking to her and maybe getting lore updates or something, because I don't really remember doing anything in there except, leaving. Anyway, that about wraps up the tutorial area. You do meet another NPC there and get a few more combat tutorials and things like that, but for the most part, this is really all the interesting stuff in this section. Now again, since this is a demo, they did have us jumping around the game a bit, so fair warning, this is not the order things will happen in the full game. But after leaving the tutorial section, we jumped into one of the main dungeons in the game, which is called the Sunken Pylon. And we get to meet another playable companion, Josie, who is an absolute unit. Seriously, dude, I actually love her. She's hilarious. And here we finally get thrown into this game's version of the memory segments. And I gotta be honest, dude, I audibly cheered in the venue when I realized you can run around and actually, like, skip through the dialogue in the memory sections now. For those of you who've seen my Code Vein 1 content, you'll probably remember one of my biggest complaints about that game is that your only choices for the memory segments are either skip them entirely or walk through them painfully slowly. So having this change where you can approach these sections at, like, whatever pace you want and still appreciate the lore, which is quite good, by the way, that might unironically be the best improvement in this game from Code Vein 1. Anyway, after that sequence, we get to play through the dungeon. And I've got a bunch to touch on here since this is kind of the bulk of the gameplay time we had. Although I do want to add another quick disclaimer. In case you weren't aware, Code Vein 2 does have open world sections. There's a whole overworld where you can traverse between points of interest and you, like, ride a motorcycle and stuff. But full disclosure, we didn't get to play any of that during this demo. So in case you're wondering what that looks like or if it's fun to do or whatever, sorry about that. I genuinely just have no idea. But getting back to the dungeon here, this is the first point where we really had options to mess around with our builds. One thing I do want to point out is that the weapon variety in this game is awesome. I think there's like 8 or 9 weapon classes. I can't exactly remember. And each one's playstyle is pretty distinct. It's not like Code Vein 1 where, you know, all the heavy weapons kind of played the same and then all the light weapons kind of played the same. There's a lot of room to experiment here and find a build that works for you and how you want to play the game. So in this encounter here, you're actually going to see me die and then I get resurrected by Josie. Now, this mechanic is returning from Code Vein 1, but I do want to talk about it for a minute because I think the differences in what it represents are really cool. So like I was talking about earlier, your companion isn't just an NPC anymore. They actually give you buffs and abilities too. And this is one area where you have to balance that because once they revive you, they actually despawn for a bit instead of the ability just going on cooldown like it did in Code Vein 1. So like, yeah, you do have that in your back pocket in the event you make a mistake, but on the flip side, you're gonna have to play around the fact that your companion's gonna be AFK for a bit. Also, another thing I want to mention is that there is a way to play solo but still enjoy the buffs from your partner. Now, full disclosure, I didn't use it at all because I was enjoying having the companion around, but unlike the first game where your choices were have a companion or play solo and be nerfed, in this game there is a way to, like, I think you absorb your companion almost, so you're playing solo but you still get benefits from having them around. Again, I didn't really use it at all, so I might be explaining that completely wrong, but that's what I think it does at least. Now, to talk about the level design for a bit, at least as far as this dungeon goes, it's very similar to Code Vein 1, which is by no means a bad thing. I personally really liked Code Vein 1's level design, so more of the same is actually pretty welcome. But one nice improvement I do want to touch on is the variety of enemies. Obviously, I can't speak for the rest of the game since I only got to play this one dungeon, but the actual enemy types you encounter are much more varied than the first game, so rather than kind of getting sick of fighting the same thing over and over again by the time you get to the boss, the encounters actually still feel fresh once you get to the end. And yes, I even mean the ones with pot shotters. And getting back to the blood codes for a minute, I want to talk about this encounter right here. So as you can see, I hit that guy and I'm just dead. And I literally said out loud, dude, what just killed me? I'm not gonna lie, it was a little embarrassing. One of the Bandai people actually had to come over and like explain how I died to me. But the reason is, as it turns out, some of the blood codes have like negative affinities attached to them now. In the case of the one I was using, you see at the bottom there, it says Ichor Overflow deals recoil damage. So what that means is if I go over my maximum resource, which in case you didn't know, you just gain that from attacking, so it's actually pretty easy to do, I end up taking damage. Now, I'll admit, that might sound really stupid if you haven't played the first game, but I actually kind of like this. Because what this means is, with some blood codes, you actually have to play around different effects if you want the benefits of them. And I actually think this is a nice change of pace because in the first game, there was literally no reason not to just equip whatever blood code had the best stats for your weapon, and then just mix and match your abilities after the fact. So I'm really interested to see how Code Vein 2 plays with this idea, and if there's like different drawbacks to blood codes for some of the other playstyles. Anyway, we continue to progress the level here and got some more memories, which explain Josie's backstory and motivations and stuff. And those are now represented by these spider web thingies, I guess. And I don't know if this is exclusive to this level or if it's gonna replace the first game's vestige system. I'm curious how it's gonna play. Because the thing is, the way Code Vein 1 encouraged you to explore levels rather than just blitz them to the bosses was the vestiges. Because in addition to unlocking memories, they also give you new abilities, so you had to be really thorough if you wanted more power-ups and stuff. Though again, some of this exploration might have been moved to the open world sections, so we're gonna have to wait until the full game comes out to see how that goes. Cutting back to the gameplay a bit, at this point I ended up switching from the bonk sword to the dual blades here, and this gets back to what I was saying before about how there's something for every playstyle. I just wasn't really vibing with how slow the greatsword played, but once I swapped to dual blades, it felt like the whole game opened up for me. And that's not even to say the greatsword is bad or the dual blades are good or whatever, but the dual blades on the whole were just a much better fit for my playstyle, and once I equipped them, it felt like the game was playing with me rather than me trying to fit how the game wanted me to play. So that is a bit of a pro tip for you guys. If you do pick this game up and you find yourself struggling with the combat or anything, try switching up the build or your weapon. Because again, the playstyles on these different weapons have a ton of variety to them. I'm sure you'll be able to find something that fits how you want to play. Although, as I say all that, I do just want to add a quick note here. In classic me fashion, your boy did find the cheese build. You'll see it a bit later against one of the bosses we get to fight, but trust me, my build ended up absolutely disgusting. And on that subject, I think it's time for the first boss encounter. You guys who watch me on a regular basis probably know, beyond the levels and the builds and all that good stuff, the boss battles are the content I really want to see, so I was especially hyped for this part of the presentation. And I am pleased to say that the two we did get to fight in this demo did not disappoint. So here we have the Metagen Remnant, which is this dungeon's kind of like final boss or whatever, I guess. It's got a pretty interesting design. Big sweeping attacks that are pretty well telegraphed and not too complicated, but it does kind of hit like a truck. And this boss actually does something interesting that I really enjoy. So if you look at its design, right? Big arms, laser attacks that come out of the front. Any seasoned Souls-like player is immediately gonna go, oh, you gotta go hit it in the butt. That's like the tried and true strategy, right? But this boss, believe it or not, actually punishes you for playing like that. One of its main mechanics is that it spreads poison wherever it walks. So if you try to walk behind it, you're essentially just gonna be standing in death. Although my one complaint about this, which to be honest, I'd be shocked if they don't tweak this because I'm pretty sure every single person at this event complained about it, is that the poison is not very visually distinct from the grass in this arena, so it's kind of hard to tell if you're about to walk into it. But aside from that though, I thought this boss was a lot of fun. And because it was big and bulky, it really let me test out the capabilities of my dual blades once I sort of figured out the moveset and found the openings to actually abuse that. And in this section here, I end up doing so much damage, I even staggered it and went for the crit. Though to be honest, another thing I do want to mention, I never really figured out the stagger system in this demo. It is explained briefly in the tutorial, but I gotta be honest, I really don't understand it still. I couldn't figure out if it's a stance system like Elden Ring, or if there's some kind of damage threshold before they stagger. Now to be fair, this is probably a me thing. I'm sure people are gonna figure it out day one when the game comes out and find all kinds of ways to abuse it. But yeah, going for staggers wasn't really something I did in this demo. I kind of felt like my resources were kept up pretty well just by attacking, and once I switched to dual blades, my damage output was pretty absurd anyway. And yeah, that more or less sums up the first boss. I ended up downing it in 3 tries, I think? But don't take that as a litmus test on the difficulty. Like I said, for one thing, my build was kinda cheese, and it did take a lot of the other creators at the event more tries, so it's probably safe to say my experience was the exception, not the rule. Anyway, once we beat that boss, we skip ahead a little bit. Once again, I'm pretty sure this isn't the order of operations for the actual game, this is just for the demo. But we go back to the present time, and we end up fighting the next boss, which is essentially a corrupted version of Josie. I know I said I was trying to ignore the lore stuff, but I will say the story behind having to fight her is like really depressing. I'm wondering if it's gonna be like that for all the main bosses. Speaking of which, Josie here is what I'm assuming is this game's version of the successor bosses. In the first game, you had to kill the 4 successors to claim the pieces of the queen, and in this game, I think the general objectives are similar. You complete a main dungeon in the past like I just did, and then you fight one of these bosses in the present. And this boss was absolutely sick, dude. Her moveset was pretty challenging, and she had a pretty big variety of attacks, some of them with wind-ups, and some of them that come out pretty quick to try and keep you honest. And she actually had a bit of range to her as well. The length of her sword was really interesting because it creates a punish for trying to back roll her. There were plenty of times in this fight where I'd like overextend and try to panic roll out of her range, only to just get clipped by the end of her sword. This is a boss that demands that you learn her moveset, but it's kind of in a way that's not just complete nonsense and more of a fair challenge, if that makes sense. Like, for example, some of her sweeping attacks seem kind of ridiculous, but if you position yourself just right, you can actually strafe them for a punish window. And maybe this is just me, but I really enjoy boss design that rewards you for learning like the minutia of the boss's movesets. Anyway, once you get her into phase 2, she has this like moment of lucidity where she remembers you, so now you're even more depressed than before. And she does get some new moves here, but for the most part, it's business as usual from phase 1. But here's where the dual blades became absolute nonsense. So I haven't really explained what my skills do yet, but I have this buff ability called Blade Dance, which I think was in Code Vein 1, but I don't remember it working like this. Basically, it works like Millicent's prosthesis in Elden Ring, where successive attacks buff your damage. But the thing is, Blade Dance seems to allow your damage to become completely absurd. Like, seriously, just watch what happens to her health bar when I do my flurry attack here. And that damage buff lingers for a while too. I didn't figure out exactly how long it is, but obviously it was enough to finish her off here. This boss also only took me 3 tries, but in this instance, I'm fully willing to admit that it was the build and not just me. In fact, I know I just got done saying that she demands you learn her moveset, but I didn't even learn all her mechanics in my first encounters with her. I found out after beating her twice that apparently one of her ground targeted attacks was actually meant to be jumped over, which I didn't even attempt to do that yet. I just kind of kept tanking it. Anyway, after finishing her off, you get another memory essentially showing that you've now released Josie from her torment or whatever, and you're one step closer to the main goal of the game. And that's pretty much it as far as the demo goes. I did get to fight Josie again on another save that they made for us. This time I used the longsword instead of the dual blades. Although I did end up testing if Blade Dance worked just as good with other weapon classes, and surprise, surprise, it ended up carrying. So there's another pro tip for you guys. When the game comes out, if you're having trouble on a boss, just throw on Blade Dance and cheese your way to victory. Assuming they don't tweak it before release anyway. And yeah, I think that's about all I had to say, really. I know this wasn't exactly a formal review or anything, but I hope you got something of use out of this video. Also, just glancing over at my notes here, one thing I did forget to mention is that the soundtrack for this game is an absolute banger. You've probably heard some of it in the gameplay I've been showing. Under normal circumstances, I usually play games for videos with the music turned off, and then I replace it with something else later, but honestly, in this case, I might make an exception. The music was actually just that good. And I do want to close by saying that overall, I really enjoyed the demo. The content we got to play was a ton of fun, and I mean, I was going to be playing Code Vein 2 anyway, but I'm even more excited for it now, knowing what it is we have to look forward to. And as always, if you did enjoy this video, definitely make sure you leave a like, and if you're new or you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel, and go follow me on Twitter for updates and stuff. That's about it. I'll see you guys in the next one.